Welcome back to Black Box Ops, the channel that pries open the classified projects and uncovers the hidden stories behind the gear that gives our elite warriors the edge. We see the dramatic footage, the night raids, the hostage rescues, the precision strikes. We marvel at the capability, the technology, the almost science fiction-like tools wielded by America's special forces. We assume these tools are born in gleaming, multi-billion-dollar R&D facilities, the product of committees, contracts, and years of meticulous top-down design. Sometimes that's true, but sometimes the most revolutionary piece of kit, the device that fundamentally changes how operators fight and survive, doesn't come from the top. It comes from the bottom. It comes from a lone wolf, a tinkerer, maybe even a perceived failure, who sees a problem no one else does and builds a solution so simple, so unorthodox, that the entire system dismisses it out of hand. Tonight, we tell the story of a man who wasn't a general, wasn't a high-paid contractor, wasn't even an officer. He was a scientist, a technician, a guy whose job was just to fix things, not reinvent them. But he saw a future the brass couldn't comprehend. He saw a battlefield where a crazy wire trick could mean the difference between life and death. He built a prototype. It was mocked. It was dismissed as naive, as stupid, as a fundamental misunderstanding of physics. But that stupid prototype, it held the key. It was the seed that grew into a technology that is now utterly fundamental to how U.S. Special Forces operate, survive, and dominate in the shadows. This is how one technician's crazy wire trick made U.S. jets invisible to radar. Before we infiltrate this story, if you believe that innovation often comes from the most unexpected places and that the status quo needs to be challenged, then I need you to secure our comms channel. First, hit that subscribe button and activate the notification bell. It's your primary way to support the mission here. Second, give this video a like. It signals to the algorithms that these stories need to be declassified. And finally, drop a comment down below. Let us know what country and city you're monitoring this transmission from. Our global intelligence network is our greatest asset. All right, let's power up the prototype. His name was Dr. Elias Cade, and in 1997, he was a ghost, haunting the beige-walled, fluorescent-lit corridors of the Natick Soldier Research, Development, and Engineering Center. Cade wasn't a weapons designer. He wasn't a ballistician or an explosives expert. He was a physicist, a specialist in terahertz frequency electromagnetics, a man whose passions were humanitarian, not martial. He was, to put it mildly, an odd fit. While his colleagues were busy optimizing the ballistic protection of new helmet liners or the thermal properties of cold-weather boot insulation, Cade was obsessed with a single, deeply compassionate problem: finding life. His driving ambition, the project he poured his nights and weekends into, was Project Beacon, a device he believed could save hundreds, perhaps thousands of lives in the aftermath of terrorist bombings like the one that had just shattered Oklahoma City 2 years prior, or catastrophic earthquakes. His goal was to build a man-portable sensor, a life finder, that could penetrate dozens of feet of concrete and rebar to detect the faint, subtle biological signatures of a living human, a heartbeat, a breath. He envisioned rescue workers, soldiers in urban combat, sweeping the device over a collapsed building and seeing, in real time, survivor, 3 meters down, 2 meters left. It was a noble, almost holy quest. It was also, according to his superiors, a complete and utter waste of time. His boss, Dr. Marcus Holloway, was a man who lived and died by deliverables, by budgets, and by the strict, unambiguous requirements set forth by Army TRADOC. And TRADOC, in the late 90s, was focused on the Big Five, on Abrams tank upgrades and the Crusader artillery system. They were not interested in a high-risk, low-payoff humanitarian device that sounded like science fiction. Elias, Holloway would say, his voice a mask of forced patience. The Army is not a search and rescue organization. We have priorities. Your project has produced 0 verifiable results. The simulations are flat. The penetration is negligible. You can't even find a hamster behind a cinder block. And you're promising me you can find a man under a skyscraper? The physics just isn't there. Cade would try to argue, his hands flying as he explained his theory, that it wasn't about power, but about frequency. He believed that in the terahertz gap, that dead zone of the electromagnetic spectrum between microwaves and infrared, there existed a window, a specific set of frequencies that could penetrate dense materials without scattering, and which would be uniquely absorbed and re-radiated by the complex molecules of living tissue. He wasn't just pinging for movement, he was looking for a spectral signature. Holloway wasn't impressed. He saw only a budget line that was producing nothing. He gave Cade an ultimatum. In 1 week, at the quarterly review, he had to demonstrate a significant, undeniable breakthrough in detection capability, or Project Beacon would be terminated, its funding and lab space reallocated to a more promising program, like a new camouflage pattern. Cade was shattered, but not broken. He was desperate. He knew he was close. His simulations were flat, because the physics was too complex for the computers of the day. His real-world tests had failed, because his emitters were too weak, too diffuse. The terahertz signal was scattering off the surface of the concrete test slabs before it ever had a chance to penetrate. He needed more power, yes, but more importantly, he needed focus. He needed to get the signal into the material. His lab was a graveyard of scavenged parts, old naval radar magnetrons, signal generators from defunct university physics experiments, a custom-built emitter array that looked like a futuristic showerhead. He had one junior technician, a young, bright-eyed, terrified woman named Sarah Jenkins, who mostly just tried to keep him from accidentally electrocuting himself. For 3 days, they worked around the clock, Cade living on stale coffee and a frantic, manic energy. He was out of options. The by-the-book approach had failed. It was time for the crazy. His idea was simple: constructive interference. If he could take the output from his dozen small emitters and focus them, not just spatially, but temporally, aligning the phase of each wave perfectly, he could create a single, intense, needlepoint beam of terahertz energy. It was a phased array concept, but one so complex and precise given his mismatched, jury-rigged hardware that it was considered impossible. It required manually rewiring the entire system, bypassing every safety governor, every power limiter, every regulatory circuit that Holloway had insisted on. It was a crazy wire trick, a hardware hack that violated a dozen safety protocols. "Dr. Cade, you can't," Sarah pleaded, her voice trembling as she watched him pulling the heavy shielded safety baffles off the main power supply. "The RF output, the safety limit is 5 watts. If you bypass the governors and phase align the emitters, the focal point energy will be..." "God, I can't even calculate it. You'll fry the entire array." "You could start a fire." "It's not working, Sarah," Cade shot back, his hands a blur, stripping wires, soldering new connections. "It's not working. Diffuse signal is useless. I need penetration. I need a spike. Just one clean spike. To prove the principle. To get the echo." He was a man possessed, his humanitarian goal justifying his reckless means. He was trying to save lives, and he was willing to break every rule in the lab to do it. Finally, he was done. The array was silent, but a low, ominous hum now emanated from the overloaded power supply. The air in the lab felt different, static, heavy. He pointed the array at the test target, a 3-meter-thick block of steel-reinforced concrete, the very one he'd been failing to penetrate for 6 months. Behind it, in the shielded receiving chamber, was the target, a human analog dummy, a 180-pound block of calibrated tissue-simulating ballistic gelatin, wired with temperature sensors and a single, tiny mechanical heartbeat simulator. "Okay," Cade breathed, his face slick with sweat. "Running the test, bypassing safeties, now. Emitters live, full power, focused phase, 5-second burst." He hit the enter key. The lights in the entire wing of the laboratory dimmed, the massive power draw sucking the grid dry. The emitters didn't just hum, they let out a single, low, guttural, vibrating that seemed to shake the very air in the room. A sound that felt more like a pressure than a noise. It lasted for exactly 5 seconds. Then, silence. The power supply breakers tripped, plunging the lab into emergency half-light. Cade stared at his main console. The receive screen, the one that should have shown the beautiful, faint echo of a heartbeat, was blank. Nothing. Just static. No, he whispered, his shoulders slumping. No. He had failed. He had fried the entire array, blown the breakers, violated every protocol, and still gotten no signal. It was over. Holloway was right. He was a failure. Dr. Cade? Sarah's voice was a thin, terrified squeak. Do you smell that? Cade sniffed. The familiar sharp smell of ozone from the high-voltage discharge was there, yes, but underneath it was something else. Something thick, heavy, acrid. Something organic. It's like a barbecue, Sarah whispered, her face pale. A new, cold, nameless dread washed over Cade. He ran from the control room, grabbing a fire extinguisher, thinking he'd set a bundle of cables on fire. He ran down the hall to the shielded receiving chamber, the smell getting stronger with every step. He cranked the heavy, lead-lined door open. The concrete block was fine. The air in the chamber was hazy and hot. The smell was overwhelming, a sickeningly sweet roast smell. He looked at the target, the ballistic gelatin dummy. It was gone. It wasn't there. In its place, on the metal chair where it had been sitting, was a large, steaming, bubbling, carbonized black puddle. A pool of molten, smoking, liquefied goo that was dripping onto the concrete floor with a sound like frying bacon. Cade just stared. His life finder, his humanitarian rescue device, had not detected the target. It had boiled it. It had silently, invisibly, in 5 seconds, cooked it from the inside out, through 3 meters of solid, reinforced concrete. His experiment hadn't just failed, it had succeeded, in the most horrifying, grotesque, and lethal way imaginable. He had accidentally built a death ray. The silence in the shielded receiving chamber was absolute, a vacuum so profound it seemed to pull all sound, all thought, all sanity, into the smoking, carbonized black puddle that was still dripping, with a sickening, viscous sizzle, onto the concrete floor. Dr. Elias Cade stood frozen in the doorway, the fire extinguisher suddenly feeling absurdly heavy in his grip, a useless totem against a horror that was not burning, but had already boiled. The air was a thick, unbreathable cocktail of ozone, vaporized plastic from the chair, and the utterly grotesque, stomach-turning, sweetly acrid smell of a massive, instantaneous roast. It was the smell of cooked gelatin, a smell that his primal hindbrain, in a terrifying leap of logic, instantly translated. It smells like pork. It smells like us. Sarah Jenkins, his young technician, was leaning against the hallway wall behind him, her hand clamped over her mouth, her face a mask of waxy greenish white. She wasn't screaming. She was making a series of quiet, choked, gagging sounds, her body convulsing, her eyes wide with a terror so profound it had gone past panic and into pure system-shocked horror. "Dr. Cade," she finally whispered, the sound a dry, ragged tear in the silence. What was that? It's gone. It's liquid." Cade's mind, a place that usually found comfort in the elegant, predictable dance of equations and wave-particle duality, was short-circuiting. He had done it. His crazy wire trick, his desperate last-ditch phase alignment hack, had bypassed the governors. It had focused the emitters, and it had worked. It had worked with a silent, invisible, terrifying efficiency that was 1,000 times more successful than his most optimistic dreams and 1,000,000 times more horrifying. He had set out to detect a heartbeat. Instead, he had found a way to stop one instantly through 3 meters of solid steel-reinforced concrete. The implications of what was now a bubbling carbonized pool on that chair began to cascade, one after another, in his paralyzed brain. This is not a rescue device. This is the perfect assassination tool. A weapon that could kill a target in a sealed bunker, in a moving car, in the deepest, most secure, most bomb-proof command center on Earth. A weapon that left no fragmentation, no blast damage, no warning, just a silent, invisible cooking beam. It was a war crime in a box. It was a monster. And he, Elias Cade, the pacifist, the humanitarian, the man who just wanted to find survivors in the rubble. He was its father. It's a failure, Sarah, Cade whispered, the lie forming on his lips instantly, a reflex of pure moral panic. He turned, his movements suddenly sharp, frantic, grabbing the heavy lead-lined door and slamming it shut with a resounding final thud. He sealed the chamber, as if he could wall off the truth, wall off the smell. It's a catastrophic failure. Failure? Sarah repeated, her voice trembling, her eyes meeting his. Doctor, it went through the concrete. It boiled it. That wasn't a failure. That was exactly what your theory— No, Cade snapped, his voice a harsh, guttural bark that shocked them both. He grabbed her by the shoulders, his grip painfully tight, his eyes wild. It did not work. It failed. It failed to detect anything. It overloaded. It created a thermal resonance feedback loop, an unshielded power surge. It cooked the target gelatin, yes, but as a byproduct of a catastrophic electrical fire. It didn't detect it. It just fried it. And itself. It's useless. Do you understand me? He was begging her, he realized, begging her to accept the lie. It's a failure, Sarah. A complete, total, dangerous failure. Sarah stared at him, her terror of the experiment suddenly overshadowed by a new, dawning fear of her boss. She saw the raw panic in his eyes, the desperate, pleading need for her to agree. She just nodded, her body rigid, her voice a tiny squeak. Yes. Yes, sir. A failure. A power surge. Good, Cade breathed, releasing her, his own body trembling. Good. Now, we clean up. The next 48 hours were a descent into a paranoid, conspiratorial hell. They became criminals, erasing the evidence of their terrifying discovery. The first task was the smell. Cade and Sarah opened the lab's emergency ventilation ports, flooding the entire wing with freezing night air, then deliberately, intentionally, shorted out the main power supply unit they had bypassed. They created a real electrical fire, a smaller, controllable one, sacrificing the multi-thousand-dollar piece of equipment to create a plausible source for the acrid smell of burnt wiring and ozone that now permeated the building. The roast pork smell, they prayed, would be dismissed as just part of the same electrical fire, the smell of burning plastic insulation and overheated transformers. Then the receiving chamber, the puddle. Cade, dressed in a full-body hazmat suit, went in alone. He couldn't ask Sarah to do it. He spent 3 hours in the dead of night in that concrete tomb with a scraper, a chemical solvent, and a high-powered shop vac. He scraped the carbonized viscous goo, the liquefied 180-pound remains of his test dummy, off the chair, off the floor. It was a grotesque physical act of erasing his sin. He sealed the resulting biohazardous sludge in a heavy lead-lined drum, which he then mislabeled as corrosive solvent waste, pending disposal. He bleached the concrete floor until his own hands, inside the rubber gloves, were raw and stinging from the fumes. He scrubbed the walls. He erased the stain of his success. The final act of self-immolation was the most painful. He had to destroy his work. He had to murder his own genius. He went to his beautiful, custom-built, phased array emitter, the physical manifestation of his crazy wire trick, the key to the entire discovery. And with a heavy-duty crowbar and a ball-peen hammer, he meticulously, systematically destroyed it. He smashed the custom-cut terahertz waveguides. He cracked the delicate emitter crystals. He took the hammer to the phase aligner boards he had so lovingly, painstakingly soldered himself. He turned his revolutionary breakthrough into a pile of unrecognizable, scorched, shattered junk. He had to make it look like the catastrophic power surge had done it. He had to make his lie real. He took his logbooks, his notebooks filled with the equations for the phase alignment, and he shredded them. He reformatted his workstation's hard drive, wiping the simulations, the data, the code. He erased everything, almost everything. In one single act of defiance, or perhaps of self-preservation, he copied the raw data from that final, terrible test, the sensor logs, the power output readings, and his original crazy wire schematic, onto a single encrypted 44-megabyte floppy disk. He slipped it into his pocket. He was burying his monster, but he was keeping a single, skeletal finger. He was now ready for his execution. He walked into the quarterly review meeting, his face a mask of exhausted, practiced defeat. The room was full. Holloway, at the head of the table, had clearly invited extra department heads, extra Army liaisons to witness the final public flogging and dissection of Project Beacon. "Well, Dr. Cade," Holloway began, his voice a smooth, purring engine of smug satisfaction. "The week is up. Your budget is spent. Your project is at its end. The floor is yours. Please, dazzle us with your breakthrough. Did you find the hamster?" A low, cruel titter of laughter rippled through the assembled scientists and officers. Cade just stood there, his hands clasped behind his back, a picture of abject failure. "Dr. E. Holloway." "Members of the board," Cade began, his voice flat, dead, devoid of its usual passion. "I am here to report that Project Beacon is a failure." Holloway's smirk widened. "A failure, Doctor? How?" "Unexpected. The core hypothesis," Cade continued, his voice a monotone, "that terahertz frequencies can be used for subsurface biological detection, appears to be fundamentally flawed." He clicked to a slide on the projector. It was a picture of his beautiful, custom-built emitter array, now a mangled, scorched, blackened wreck. In a final, desperate attempt to achieve the required penetration and signal return, I pushed the system far beyond its design specifications. I bypassed the safety governors on the power supply and phase aligners. "You what?" Holloway gasped, his smugness instantly replaced by genuine shock and anger. "You bypassed the safeties? On a high-energy RF device? Are you insane, Cade?" "It was an error in judgment, sir," Cade said quietly, looking down at his feet, playing the part of the chastened fool perfectly. "A catastrophic one. The result was not a breakthrough. The result was a massive, cascading overload. The emitters are fried. The phase aligners are slag. The power supply is a total loss. The entire array is gone." He clicked to the next slide, a picture of the empty receiving chamber, the chair and floor scrubbed clean. And the target analog was damaged in the event. But the test was inconclusive. No signal was detected. Nothing. The project is a dead end. "You were right, Dr. Holloway. The physics just isn't there." The room was silent, stunned. Cade hadn't just failed. He had failed spectacularly, recklessly, destroying tens of thousands of dollars in irreplaceable, custom-built government equipment in the process. He had admitted to it. He had proven himself not just a dreamer, but an incompetent, dangerous one. Holloway stood up, his face a mask of cold, righteous fury. The pity was gone, replaced by the ice of a man whose authority had been vindicated in the most satisfying way possible. "Dr. Cade," he said, his voice clipping each word, "this is not just a failure. This is the most profound display of irresponsibility and insubordination I have ever witnessed at this facility. You ignored direct counsel. You violated basic safety protocols. You endangered your technician." Sarah, sitting in the back, flushed crimson, staring at her lap. "You destroyed your own lab, and you have produced nothing." He looked around the room. "Effective immediately, Project Beacon is terminated. All associated funding is rescinded. All lab space is reallocated. And you, Dr. Cade, you are hereby reassigned, pending a full investigation into your malfeasance." The rejection was total. It was brutal. It was public. Cade didn't even get to keep his lab. His reassignment was the ultimate humiliation, a masterpiece of Holloway's bureaucratic cruelty. He was sent to the basement, to a windowless 8x8 office in the metrology lab. His new job, his new project, was calibrating thermometers, verifying the temperature and humidity sensors for the entire facility's HVAC system. A job for a first-year intern, not a PhD physicist. He was a joke. He was the rejected scientist. The man who dreamed of finding life under rubble was now making sure the accounting office wasn't too cold. And he was alone. Sarah Jenkins, terrified for her own career, had requested and been granted an immediate transfer to a different division. He couldn't blame her. He was radioactive. He sat in his basement tomb, surrounded by calibration logs, the smell of dust and old paperwork, replacing the sharp scent of ozone and hot metal. He was broken. He was forgotten. But he was also a liar. Because in a locked drawer in his apartment, miles away from Natick, hidden beneath a pile of old textbooks, was a single encrypted floppy disk. On it was the raw sensor data from the final, failed experiment, the power readings, the frequency logs, the thermal data from the receiving chamber, and, most importantly, his own hand-drawn, crazy schematic for the phased array emitter, the wire trick that had bypassed the safeties and focused the beam. He had failed to save lives. He had succeeded in creating a monster. And now, rejected and alone, he was the only man in the world who knew how to build it. Cade's purgatory in the metrology lab lasted for 4 agonizing years. 4 years of dusting, calibrating, and logging the ambient temperature of unremarkable rooms. He became a ghost, a cautionary tale whispered by new hires, the mad scientist who had a breakdown, fried his own lab, and got demoted to the basement. His fire, his passion, his once brilliant mind were seemingly extinguished, buried under the mundane, soul-crushing weight of his daily, meaningless tasks. He was the perfect rejected scientist, his failure absolute, his exile complete. Dr. Holloway, now a deputy director, would sometimes pass him in the hallway, offering a thin, pitying, triumphant smile. Cade had been neutralized. He was no longer a threat to the budget, no longer a challenge to the established order. He was just the thermometer guy. But the world outside had changed. The date, September 11, 2001, had redrawn the map of global conflict. The enemy was no longer a state, but a network. The battlefield was no longer a clearly defined front, but a shadowy, asymmetric war fought in the caves of Afghanistan and the dense urban canyons of Iraq. The United States was pouring billions into finding an enemy who hid in subterranean complexes, deep under granite and concrete, an enemy that conventional surveillance, ground-penetrating radar, and even bunker-busting bombs were failing to pinpoint. And in his basement tomb, surrounded by his ticking precise instruments, Elias Cade watched. He watched the news reports from Tora Bora. He watched the grainy green and black footage of Special Forces teams staring helplessly at cave entrances, knowing their primary target was just yards away, but completely, totally invisible. He watched, and the slow-burning ember of his buried, terrifying secret began to glow. The failure of Project Beacon, the horrifying success of his experiment. He had buried it out of a pacifist's morality, out of a deep-seated fear of what he had created. But now, that morality was twisted, recontextualized. His death ray was a monster, yes, but the physics behind it, the penetration. That was the key. He had done what the entire multi-billion-dollar defense industry was failing to do. He had pushed a focused, coherent signal through dense material. The lethal effect, he knew, was a function of uncontrolled, catastrophic power. It was the result of his crazy wire trick, his desperate bypass of all safeties. But what if? What if he hadn't bypassed them? What if he had controlled them? What if, instead of a continuous, 5-second high-energy blast designed to cook, he had used a low-power, coded, microsecond pulse? A signal strong enough to penetrate and reflect, but too weak to cause harm. A true echolocation system. His original humanitarian dream, but now repurposed, militarized. The moral dilemma was agonizing. To reveal his findings, he would have to admit the truth of that day, the truth of the liquefied dummy, the truth of his cover-up, the truth that he was capable of creating such a thing. But to stay silent, to hoard his secret while men were dying in a war he might hold the key to. That, he realized, was a different, colder kind of moral failure. He spent a month in the quiet of his apartment, pulling the encrypted data from his hidden hard drive. He refined the algorithms. He wrote a new proposal. Not Project Beacon, the Life Finder, but Project Echo Point, a subterranean target characterization and imaging system. He described the physics of terahertz wave penetration, the potential of a phased array emitter, his wire trick, now given a respectable name, and the concept of a low-power pulse echo sensor. He carefully, deliberately omitted the data from his final disastrous experiment. He presented it as a theory that needed testing, not a discovery that had already been made. He signed his name, his obscure title, Metrology Technician 3, Stark at the bottom. He sealed it in a plain manila envelope and sent it, not to Holloway, not to the Army, but to the one place that actively solicited crazy, rejected, high-risk ideas, the Unsolicited Proposals Office at DARPA. For 6 months, nothing. The silence from DARPA was as profound as the silence from his own colleagues. His letter, he assumed, had been lost in the slush pile, a crazy idea from a failed scientist rightfully ignored. His brief flicker of hope guttered out, leaving him in his calibrated darkness, a man resigned to his fate. Then, on a Tuesday, in the middle of a tedious sensor drift calculation for the main building's HVAC system, they came. They didn't call. They didn't email. They didn't check in at the front desk. The door to his basement office simply opened, violating the very solitude that had become his prison. 2 men, in identical nondescript dark gray suits that seemed to absorb the weak fluorescent light. They were medium height, medium build, medium everything, utterly forgettable except for their eyes. Their eyes were cold, flat, devoid of curiosity, and they missed nothing. They scanned Cade, the cluttered desk, the calibration logs, the escape-proof concrete block walls, in a single comprehensive sweep. Dr. Elias Cade, the taller one asked. His voice was a quiet, polite monotone, with no discernible accent. It wasn't a question. It was a confirmation. Cade's heart, which had been beating at the slow, steady rhythm of his exile, gave a single, painful, lurching thump. "Yes?" "You'll come with us," the man said. It was not a request. Cade didn't speak. He just stood up, his lab coat stained with calibration fluid, suddenly feeling like a clown's costume. He didn't grab his keys. He didn't turn off his computer. He just followed. They walked, in silence, out of the basement, past the security desk. The guard didn't even look up, as if the men in suits were invisible, and into the bright, cold New England sunlight. A black unmarked sedan, a model Cade didn't recognize, was idling at the curb. No government plates, no markings at all. He got in the back. The doors shut with a heavy, satisfying thud, the sound of a bank vault closing. The 2 men sat in the front. They didn't speak. They just drove. They drove for over an hour, leaving the familiar suburban sprawl of Natick, heading south, into the anonymous glass and steel office parks of the Virginia suburbs, a landscape of identical buildings housing 10,000 secrets. They pulled into an underground garage, beneath a building with no name, just a number. They led him through a series of keycard access doors, each one hissing open and thudding shut behind them, into an elevator that went down, deep into the earth. They finally stopped in a small, windowless, soundproofed room, a SCIF Cade recognized, a sensitive compartmented information facility. The room was bare, save for a simple steel table and 3 chairs. Seated at the table waiting was one man. He was older, perhaps in his late 60s, dressed in a crisp white shirt and a plain, dark blue tie. He had the patient, weary, intellectual air of a university provost. He looked up as Cade entered, his eyes sharp but not unkind. "Dr. Cade," he said, his voice soft, almost gentle. "Thank you for coming. Please, sit." Cade sat, his legs feeling weak, his mind a roaring void. The two men who had escorted him stood perfectly still at the door behind him. "My name is not important," the man in the white shirt said. "You can call me the deputy. I am an admirer of your work." He gestured to the single, thin black folder on the table in front of him. Project Echo Point and her ambitious proposal. Terahertz phased arrays, subterranean imaging, very creative, very bold. For a metrology technician 3. Cade's blood turned to ice. This wasn't an interview. It was an interrogation. They knew. It's a theoretical proposal," Cade stammered, the old familiar shame washing over him. "Based on some data I collected a few years ago." "Yes," the deputy said, his voice still soft. "Your data. We found your proposal intriguing, Dr. Cade, so we did our own due diligence. We acquired certain relevant sensor data from the time of your previous project, the Project Beacon failure." He opened the folder. In it was Cade's proposal, and underneath it, a single grainy 810 black and white satellite photograph, a thermal image. Cade's heart stopped. It was a picture of Natick, of his lab, taken at night 4 years ago. A massive, anomalous, white-hot bloom of thermal energy was clearly visible, originating from his receiving chamber. A heat signature that had no business existing, a spike so intense it had flared the satellite's sensors. "You weren't entirely truthful in your proposal, Doctor," the deputy continued, his voice still gentle, conversational. "You presented Echo Point as a theory, a low-power sensor concept." He tapped the thermal image. "This suggests you are well past the theoretical stage. This suggests you generated a phenomenal amount of focused energy, far, far more than any life finder would ever require. It also suggests, Doctor, that you lied, not just to us, but quite thoroughly to Dr. Holloway and the entire U.S. Army." Cade couldn't breathe. He was exposed, utterly. It was a failure," Cade whispered, the old lie, the practiced excuse, coming to his lips automatically. "A power supply overload, a catastrophic failure, an electrical fire." The deputy held up a hand, silencing him. "Please, Elias." "May I call you Elias?" Cade just nodded dumbly. "Please," the deputy said. "We're not Dr. Holloway. We're not the Army. We are the intelligence community. We don't care about your lab protocols. We don't care that you broke your toys, Doctor, or that you lied to your incompetent superiors. We are a results-oriented organization." He leaned forward, his eyes locking on Cade's, the kindness vanishing, replaced by a gaze of absolute, chilling intensity. "What we care about is this." He slid a second photo across the table, a diagram, a crude, hand-drawn schematic. Cade's crazy wire trick. His phased array emitter, the one he had drawn on a legal pad, the one he thought only he and Sarah Jenkins had ever seen, the one he had personally destroyed. "We had a long conversation with a very bright, very frightened young technician named Sarah Jenkins," the deputy said simply, answering the unspoken question. She was forthcoming. She had a remarkable memory. She kept notes. Cade felt a wave of nausea, of betrayal, then just a vast, cold emptiness. He had been so careful, but he had forgotten the human element. "So," the deputy continued, "let's stop wasting time. Your proposal to build a low-power sensor, your Echo Point, it's interesting, noble. We are very interested in finding things hidden in caves." He paused, his gaze hardening. "But I am far more interested in the experiment you actually conducted, the one you lied about, the one where you generated a coherent, focused, high-energy terahertz beam and boiled a 180-pound gelatin target through 3 meters of solid steel-reinforced concrete." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper, a sound that was somehow louder than a shout in the soundproofed room. "Your failed experiment, Dr. Cade, is the single most important breakthrough in directed energy weapons this agency has seen in 50 years. You didn't just fail to build a life finder. You accidentally, brilliantly, succeeded in building a death ray. Cade was shaking violently now, a deep, uncontrollable tremor. No, I won't. That's not what... I'm a humanitarian. I will not build a weapon. I destroyed it. I destroyed the notes. It's gone. A weapon? The deputy smiled, a cold, thin, reptilian expression. It was the first time Cade had seen him smile. It was terrifying. Doctor, you're thinking too small. You're thinking like a physicist. You're thinking about boiling people. That's messy, inelegant, brutal. He shook his head. What we are thinking about is the signal. He tapped the satellite photo. The sheer brute force power you unleashed. You know what a high-energy terahertz pulse also does, Doctor? Besides cook gelatin? Cade, his mind reeling, 1,000 equations and interactions suddenly colliding, shook his head mutely. It fries electronics, the deputy said, his voice full of a cold, predatory discovery. It's the perfect non-kinetic electronic warfare pulse. It's an EMP, but focused. A beam. It can penetrate a bunker, a tank's armor, a ship's command and control center, and scramble every circuit, every chip, every hard drive inside instantly. It doesn't just jam the enemy, Doctor. It lobotomizes them. Silently, invisibly, at the speed of light. It's not a death ray. It's an off switch for their entire military. He leaned back. The war in Afghanistan, Iraq, that's just the beginning. That's a brawl. The next war, the war with China, with Russia, will be a war of signals, of networks, of data. The side that can turn off the other side's electronics first wins, instantly, without firing a single shot, without a single casualty. He pushed the file back towards Cade. We are going to give you a new lab, Doctor. A lab buried so deep, Dr. Holloway will never even know it exists. We are going to give you an unlimited budget. We are going to give you a team of the best minds we can find. And you are going to rebuild your crazy wire trick. You are going to perfect it. You are going to turn that failed experiment into the weapon that defines the 21st century. Cade looked at the file. He thought of his basement office, of the thermometers. He thought of his humanitarian dream, now a grotesque parody. He was trapped. His secret, his monster, was out. And the men who had found it didn't want to cage it. They wanted to weaponize it. And my sensor, Cade whispered, a last desperate, pathetic plea. My echo point. Of course, the deputy smiled, that cold smile again. You'll build that too. It's the perfect cover story for the project. A dual-use technology. And it's a good proof of concept for the low-power arrays. A good way to test the penetration physics without melting your targets. You'll build us the scalpel, and you'll build us the hammer. He stood up, offering his hand. You are no longer rejected, Dr. Cade. You are no longer the thermometer guy. You are, as of this moment, the most valuable, most classified, and most dangerous scientist we have. Welcome to the future of warfare.